PSY 310. Physiological Psychology 2. Section 1. A brief history of physiological psychology. Introduction. Research into the physiological basis of human and animal behavior has a long history dating back to about 40 years. This long history has its roots in philosophy and biology. This lecture will make you understand the emphasis they placed on the experimental and the observational test of ideas and the pragmatic approach that became the basis of physiological psychology. Objectives. At the end of this lecture, you should be able to 1. Discuss the history of physiological psychology. 2. Explain the research techniques in physiological psychology. And 3. Explain what is meant by physiological psychology. Contents. Philosophers like John Locke, 1690, John Stuart Mill, 1863, for instance, ask questions on how we understand reality and pose the mind-body relationship which is still with us today. The emphasis they place on experimental and observational test of ideas and the pragmatic approach became the basis of physiological psychology. Biologists, on the other hand, devised experimental psychology that provided the necessary tools that are used to investigate the mechanism of the body. The field also provides the framework needed to integrate findings from diverse species. This includes the principle of natural selection, evolution, and genetics. Historically, physiology and psychology began as the same discipline. Thomson, 1967, Mullers, 1840, Doctrine of Specific Nerve Energies, and Helmholtz, 1877, work on sensory function, particularly in the area of learning, are good examples of the relationship that existed between physiology and psychology. The works of these psychologists cut across physiology and psychology as they show a strong interest in basic physiological problems and are concerned with areas which are now included in the field of psychology. Thus, before psychology and physiology began to follow separate paths, both fields had influenced each other considerably. Thomson, 1967. The basic interrelatedness of the brain function and psychology had been emphasized, and interest in the psychological basis of behavior had been awakened in renowned psychologists. For instance, Wundt, 1874, investigated and published the foundations of physiological psychology. William James, 1890, paid considerable attention to the nervous system. Thorndike, 1898, investigated quantitative studies on animal learning. Carl Leslie, 1929, examined brain mechanism and intelligence, and Pavlov, 1927, reported the result of conditioned reflexes. All these contributed objective, reliable, and quantitative measures of behavior with which physiological psychology took off. Ultimately, what had been learned about the physiology of behavior had been obtained through the effort of psychologists, cell physiologists, molecular biologists, biochemists, endocrinologists, neuroanatomists, neurologists, and neurophysiologists. The connotation of this is that no single academic discipline can comfortably claim the field of physiological psychology as its own. This is the reason why diverse titles such as physiological psychology, behavioral neuroscience, biological psychology, biopsychology, and behavioral psychology are used to label the field. These names or titles have approximately the same meaning as physiological psychology. Research techniques in physiological psychology. The instruments used in physiological psychology to assess the internal functioning of the body arousal and the effects of stress on the body can be classified into two. These techniques are similar and unique. The first set of techniques involves methods that are similar to that employed by the general field of psychology. These include administration of psychological tests, interview of human subjects, and experiments with human and animal subjects. The second technique is made up of methods that are unique to physiological psychology. Examples of these are biochemical analysis of blood and urine, blood pressure, heart rate, electrical activity of the brain, and other techniques not utilized by the general discipline of psychology. Some physiological measuring instruments unique to the specialty include the skin conductance response, SCR, electrocardiogram, EKG, electroencephalogram, EEG, galvanic skin response, GSR, and the electromyogram, EMG. The SCR measures arousal. The EKG measures heart rate, while the EEG, which records brain activity, has been utilized to study sleep and electrical activity of the brain. The GSR records the activity of skin sweat glands, while the EMG measures muscle activity. These measuring instruments have been acclaimed because individuals who are examined using these measures cannot distort or control the measures as they do in self-support measures utilized by the general field of psychology. The brain has been termed the powerhouse of human behavior. If we must know about how the brain works, we should be familiar with the different methods of measuring brain activity and its influence on behavior. The measurement of brain activity in physiological psychology can be done via two broad approaches. These are the non-invasive approach and the invasive approach. The non-invasive approach makes use of instruments that operate outside the body of the individual, while the invasive approach requires that the instrument be placed inside the brain of the examinee. In some cases, the invasive approach involves removing the brain for examination. The brain is dissected using histological techniques, tissue preparing techniques such as fixation, experimental ablation, and electric currents. Fixation technique is particularly relevant when tissue or other important organs in the body are to be studied. This is because dissected tissues and organs of the body will have to be prevented from decomposition by bacteria or molds. A condition that must be met before the fixation technique is used is called perfusion. Perfusion of a tissue entails the removal of blood from the tissue of the brain and its replacement with another fluid made up of dilute salt solution. The fixation technique itself involves putting tissue or organs to be studied in a fixative, usually formalin, an aqueous solution of formaldehyde, a gas. This hardens the very soft and fragile brain and kills microorganisms that could destroy it. Thereafter, it is sliced into sections and stains for the anatomical details to be seen. The experimental ablation techniques involve destroying parts of the brain and evaluating subsequent behaviors. First, the species to be studied is anesthetized. The scalp is cut the part of the skull is removed and the context is brought into view. Suction is used to remove liquid from the brain tissue and a vacuum pump to suck away brain tissue. The changes in behavior are then observed. Brain ablation can also be made possible by using two types of electric currents. These are direct current device and radio frequency. Direct current devices create lesion by initiating chemical reactions whose products destroy the cell in the vicinity of electrode tip. Radio frequencies, on the other hand, produce alternative current of a very high frequency that destroy nearby cells with the heat produced by the passage of the current through the tissue. It should be noted that the brain ablation can also be attained by the use of chemicals like neurotoxin, nerve poison, such as cyanuric acid or ibotenic acid. Invasive experiments are performed on animals, while non-invasive ones are carried out on humans. The measure of hormone level is another unique technique of physiological psychology. Ascertaining the hormonal level of people has contributed to knowledge in the area of the physiological undertone of the heart attacks, hypertension, ulcers, abnormality in growth, and its attendant behavioral consequences. Physiological psychology. Physiological psychology is the study of the physiological basis of how we think, connecting the physical operation of the brain with what we actually say and do. It is connected with brain cells, brain structures and components, brain chemistry, and how it all leads to speech and action. It is also, of course, important to understand how we take in information from our five senses. Most often, people conceive of behavior only in terms of what they can see with their eyes. It is therefore common to hear about overt behavior such as reading, fighting, writing, dancing, and driving. Behavior is made up of two vital components. These are overt and covert behaviors, while the other aspect, which deals with unobservable neurophysiologic processes, is called covert behavior. The concepts of physiological psychology evolved over time and is deeply rooted in the assumption that most, if not all, aspects of human and animal behavior is determined by physiological processes within human and animal organisms. For example, forms of behavior like sleeping, blinking an eye, taking notes in a lecture, and driving a car depends on the integration of so many neurological processes. It is not out of place to say that behavior cannot be clearly understood without an adequate grasp of the processes that must coordinate effectively for behavior to be exhibited. Much earlier, knowledge was gained through observing how behavior changes when different parts of the brain are damaged. Animal experiments, always controversial, have been used, for example, by removing or cutting various parts of the brain and observing differences in behavior. Physiological psychology covers general area of the brain and behavior. Physiological psychology seeks to explain the internal biological structures, mechanism, and processes as they define and explain inheritance, processes, cellular functions, nervous system, endocrine activities, and how all these affect behavior. The goal of physiological psychology is to create an understanding of how these systems of the body function to produce what human and animal display as behavior. Physiological psychology can therefore be defined as the study of the neurophysiologic processes underlying brain function and behavior. It is a scientific study because the quantitative measures of behavior and the theoretical framework used in behavior inquiry are devised by experimental psychologists. Besides, its techniques of inquiry are objective, reliable, and standardized. This is a very vital component in understanding physiological psychology. Summary. 1. Historically, physiology and psychology began as the same discipline. 2. No single academic discipline can comfortably claim the field of physiological psychology as its own. 3. The brain has been termed the powerhouse of human behavior. 4. The instruments used in physiological psychology to assess the internal functioning of the body arousal and the effect of stress on the body can be classified into two. These techniques are similar and unique. 5. The measurement of brain activity in physiological psychology can be done via two broad approaches. These are the non-invasive approach and the invasive approach. 6. Ascertaining the hormonal levels of people has contributed to knowledge in the area of the physiological undertone of the heart attack, hypertension, ulcers, abnormality in growth, its attendant behavioral consequences. 7. Behavior is made up of two vital components. These are overt and covert behaviors. 8. Physiological psychology covers general area of the brain and behavior. 9. Physiological psychology can therefore be defined as the study of the neurophysiologic processes underlying brain function and behavior. 10. It is a scientific study because the quantitative measures of behavior and the theoretical framework used in behavior inquiry are devised by experimental psychologists. Besides, its techniques of inquiry are objective, reliable, and standardized. Post-test. 1. Discuss the history of physiological psychology. 2. Identify and explain the research technique in physiological psychology. 3. Explain what is meant by physiological psychology. End of study section 1. Thanks for listening.